All right, working on the 69 Dodge Dart. Now we're not doing a restoration. I explained this in the last video. It's an old race car, and it's not a nice car by any means. And when I say that, I don't mean that the 69 Dart isn't a nice car. This is not a good example of something that's restored and very, very nice. This is a car that was bondoed up back in the 80s. Now it had quarters, but the quarters I'm talking about are likely quarters that were made with machines and whatever, not pressed or stamped. So they rolled it and beaded it. And the way we know that, when you look down the side of this car, there's waves and stuff. There's a lot of filler in this car. So case in point, if you come above the repair, our repair's just lapped. And the reason we didn't bother flushing that in or anything, this is not a restoration. We're just throwing patches on this. And the reason why, the filler here is thicker than our patch. So that's going to blend right in. Now all we're doing to this car, we're going to paint from the shadow line down. So we're not putting a bunch of money into it or anything like that. It's a solid car. Guy drives it around. This is his grocery getter. This is his beater. He's got nice cars. This is the one that he's allowed to take to Walmart. And if someone puts a little ding in the door, it'll match all these other little dings. So it'll be totally fine. So it's okay to have a car like this. It's a little bit of a muscle beater, if you will. Now it does have nothing is numbers matching. This was a shell with doors and a trunk lid, so he had to put the front end on, and he put all this stuff in, and all the other parts were left over from a restoration. So all we're doing, cutting out the rot, putting some new steel on it and welding it in. We're pretty much done here. I mean, we're going to go in between and weld some of that a little more maybe, but realistically, you could probably stop there, grind the welds, fiberglass reinforced filler, because you want to seal it all up. And then your filler is going to come up to here somewhere. And again, our patch here is actually thinner than the filler in the quarters. Now, another thing where you can find older quarters in a very old restoration, when they made them, they didn't always come down into here. What they did is they just kind of ran them straight, and you'd cut them off and weld them to the edge of your rocker or make a new bottom. Now, in this case, it had original bottoms, and they just used a torch and put some tacks across to where they stopped. And then up here was all original, it just rotted away. However, it was pretty messed up, and actually what they had done was hammered in, and this from here to here was just a 1/4 inch thick coat of Bondo over top of hammered in mess. Now that said, we're not cutting out panels, we're not taking the whole thing apart. The car's solid as far as we're concerned, and this is all the owner wanted done. Fix the rust. You can see our welds underneath. You see that little orange spot up there? We cut around that. That's the original drip. So they have these little channels on a 45-degree angle where it allows moisture to come out of the rocker. They were okay, so we cut everything else out, and we just cut around those. We'll seam seal around them, but not in them, because you want that to be able to drip out. Now on the other side, we can't do that because we needed more elaborate rockers, and I didn't feel like making them because we're putting too much time into this already. So this side hasn't been welded in yet. So what we're going to have to do is find about 4 or 5 spots where we're going to drill and waller out a little bit of a, you don't want a perfectly round hole. You almost want 2 holes side by side and then wallered out. And the reason why, a long hole will allow junk to come out. It won't plug up with dirt as fast. But it'll also allow them to blast a bunch of oil into the rockers. So that was the best, quickest, easiest thing we could come up with. So what we've got going on, as you can see, I think I did another video where I showed that we redid the inner rocker on this side because some of it was bad for about 2 inches. Well, we put a 2-inch plate in, so the bottom inch, 1.5 inches was bad. And all we've done here is bent over some steel. Now you can see all the markings here in the white powder coat or whatever this primer is. This is all 19 gauge stuff that we had, so plenty strong for what we're doing. We ran this through the English wheel to get a little bit of a curve on it to match the original rockers. Now normally I'd recommend put a new rocker in, and honestly, this car, when I really go through it, would have been good enough if a guy did 2 brand new door skins from AMD, a couple of rocker panels, and 2 complete quarters. You'd have the beginnings of a real nice car. This guy has a restored car with a lot of money in it, a full paint job. And that's not what he wanted to do here. On this car, he wants to leave it what it is because it's an old race car, all beat up. He likes it. All he wants to do is take the rod away, so we're going to paint from the line down. So as far as things not fitting good, this was also all curved. But, you know, there's a bit of a Coke bottle shape to a car, so your straight metal's going to pucker and do some things. So I'll explain what we're going to do with that. Here you can see it fits nice and tight. Now when we weld that, even if we take our time and don't get too hot, it may shrink in there a little bit. That may pull this in or out, but we're not too worried past this screw. The screws are temporary. We'll pull them out, knock them in, and weld the holes shut. Now that said, we're going to start right here where it's super tight. We're going to work our way across because we want the two panels as tight as possible. Now the back sides are all sprayed with a weld-through primer everywhere we can. We will stop here. When we weld this one here, we'll knock this in. When we weld that, you got to start, and then you just kind of go around. You plug weld it. This will be hot, that we should be able to hammer on this and work our way, and this should just kind of fall into place. And if not, we'll clamp it and pull it real tight. But as that shrinks, a little bump that might appear will shrink with it. And then we'll reform this. So you can see where we didn't come quite tight enough, but that's okay. You can kind of hit it in that direction. It'll fold right over, and we'll weld this right around. Here we've got a little bump. We just kind of hammered that around as well. You can see where it divoted in on its own here. So we might, worst case scenario, if that don't want to hammer out, we might have to slice it, hammer it to where we want it to be, and then weld it shut. And basically, weld it to this template. So this is how this needs to fit. But it is pushing back a little bit, so we will have to hammer that, and it goes almost straight down and then curves. So this will flex a touch, but not as much as you would think. Now, the old ones from way back were aluminum, but these ones seem to be like a hard metal, nickel-plated, whatever. They don't move as much. Now, the aluminum ones, you could make this any shape you want and kind of just squish it in and screw it in and be done with it. So the last I did a 70 dart, 340 swinger, and it had aluminum ones that were polished. And his car wasn't perfect, but where they had kind of messed it up, we had corrected a lot of stuff. We were able to just kind of push it back in, and it just sort of reformed. And once we got that solid, we're going to come from here. We're going to run that straight across to that screw. Same idea. It sits real tight, so we'll weld that up. Then we're going to knock this in. You can see how we cut it offset, so it's clearance, so that will push in. But we'll go from that screw to where I said, and then we'll push this in and weld this tight. We can put pressure here and it'll be fine. It will push in there a little bit. Then we'll weld this across. Here we'll knock that in because there's two lips. You can see this piece here. This is to fix up around our door. Those are no big deal. We'll weld those shut, super thick. Not real sure what those were. Look like some kind of electric weld or something. Who knows? We don't really care. We do have an indent here from where the car tried to curve. Now I ran my shrinker across this. That's why it's all ground. So it should have rounded it, and it's just not going to cooperate in that one spot. Likely because these quarters are quarter over quarter. It's not original. It may have changed the shape, but we don't care about that. We'll go ahead and weld this. And if you look here, you can see we can push this in tight, and we will. And we're going to have a dent here. But first, we'll push this, weld it, weld this, and then here we'll weld a plate, and we'll pull on this to pull it out. Scratch that idea. I realize that this piece may not pull with it. We will go ahead and weld a nice chunk of this in here. And on top of that weld, we'll weld another piece of plate that's just going to stick straight out. So we can bite onto that with a pair of vice grips, and we'll be able to pull that. We'll pull that dent right out as we weld this side, and that heat will probably allow us, because it does get soft, so before it shrinks, we'll pull it out and hold it. And this should stay pretty much where it is. And if not, we can always, give it a few pulls, move it around. So we're not worried about that dent. It is what it is, and we do have to reconstruct this corner. We got a little extra meat there, so when we weld the edge, it'll melt down, and we'll weld right to the edge. This is what we really wanted to fix here. Now, before we weld this little guy, the first place we'll do is the corner. We'll make sure it's tight. We have lots of gaps, so here we can have a bit of filler, and it'll line right out. And then everything's going to line up. The door's not all the way closed, but if I come up a level, you can see we got it pretty good. That's where the door's going to sit. This will lie flat here. We're going to avoid that little piece of brass in there. Normally I'd say, oh, cut that out too. But again, this is just, we're taking care of the rust so the car can be driven, and that's all we're doing. We don't want to do work to this. We're trying to preserve it for what it is and leave it. At any rate, you kind of get the idea. When we come to the front, we're going to put a little block in here so we can push this up. And you can see how this is out. This will fall out, but we'll push this up tight, weld this solid across. We'll probably come about halfway up here. Yeah, I saw that. There's a bad spot here. We're going to have to put a piece in here, but we have to fix the top up here. So we might replace all that. But before we do, we'll lift this up, weld it so everything is flush. And then once this is stuck out, we can hammer it. And as we bring our tacks along, we can keep working it. I mean, you can push it in, but you want to hammer it in as you're welding. And what it'll do is while it's hot, it'll just sort of, it's good. You'll see it almost sink in on its own. And once you start it, it'll come. This has all been wheeled. We shrunk it on this edge as much as we could, hoping it would just lie in. But when we pull the bottom in tight, there may be a bit of a kerf to the car, and it is what it is. So you just kind of make do. It will work out. We're not too worried about it. Like I say, once you start welding on each side, it's gonna shrink, and when it pulls it, this if we push it in, it'll shrink and pull it in, and it'll kind of lay itself down. And across the bottom, we got all the holes. See if we can see those. Now, what I do with those, they're kind of on the small side, but I got a bit that's this size, and what I'll do is I'll go in this hole now and open it up with this size. What size would that be? Gosh, I don't remember, but at any rate, we use this size here, and you can see how it's bigger than the hole. But I have a second bit like this that it broke off, and we ground it flat. So after we drill our hole out with this, it'll take a bit of material out of the back. That way the paint stays on everywhere except the hole. And the one that's cut off flat, we can put it in the hole after, and it'll clean that up. So our weld will be good and strong. And a way to check that is to just jam something in between the two, and you can check. But I've welded so many of these that they tend to be pretty hard, and I don't worry about that too much anymore. But I do check. The first few I do, I'll check to make sure it's doing what I want it to do. But yeah. So you DIY guys, this is definitely something you could do, short of the English wheel. Now, before you bend your shapes, after it's all marked, I used a 3-foot bender, so I couldn't make my rocker panel come into here where they normally join. I had to stop here, but I just made this across. Again, this is not a restoration on this car. We're treating this like it's an 86 Camaro and nobody cares. That's kind of what we're doing because this is all the guy wants to spend on the car. We're not going to restripe it. We're going to run our tape right here, and we're just going to paint from here forward. And the front fenders are done, so we're not going to touch those. Hopefully our orange is close. Close is good enough. Again, this is a car built out of leftover parts and whatnot. And although a guy could restore it, this guy doesn't want to. He's got a 68 that's like beautiful. So this is his, well, look, right? Big scratch in the door. There's chips. This was a race car. It was beat and used like a race car for years. It's a little bit of a, you know, so there's some local lore around the car or whatever it is, but he just wants it to stay true to what it is. Now, the one thing we don't have for this would have had I believe some sort of blacked out hood with a hood scoop. And there's actually scratches on the roof from throwing a hood on there. I recognized him as soon as I saw him. He goes, I don't know what was piled on there. I'm like, sure you do. You know, as soon as I saw that, my days back in the 90s at the drag strip, I remember those marks. And the funny thing, the paint is scratched on both upper corners on both sides. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, that's your hood. And he just laughed. He goes, yep, that's exactly what that was. So we've got a hood off of the dark color, which is this red-orange. You can see how it's two different colors there, but we don't care. So this hood, when it was raced with a black hood. So the best we could find was this hood, and it is a 340 hood. There is a 344 speed in this car, but we're going to paint the hood black. We're also going to paint a section of the cowl black. So it'll kind of still look like the race car it was, only we've changed it, you know, to be driven on the street. But anyway, there's nothing fancy going on, and like I say, I would highly recommend if you brought this into my shop, 2 brand new quarters, 2 brand new rockers, brand new door skins, and then when the rockers, and that is, well, the rockers aren't bad behind, but up in the quarters, sometimes you'll find rot up in there that you weren't expecting, but that way, when you replace the full rocker, or sorry, the full quarter, you can get in there and replace some of the inner skeleton. Like we've got this right here. We're literally just going to clean this up, slide a little piece of steel in there, weld it around, close enough. This is just kind of a patch-up job, but it'll be welded, it'll be solid. And honestly, these things aren't driven in the winter in snow and salt, so this thing will probably last a long, long time. Yeah, so we did a video on this car, and I included it with one of my own cars, the 79 Firebird, and I basically you know, explained how there is cars out there that blue-collar working guys can't afford. Some of you guys in your 30s that are into this, I know there's less of you, but I see people doing it, and that makes me happy because somebody's got to keep this hobby alive. It's not amazing work, but you can do this work. It's plausible work. You know, once we fill this out, we'll probably just take my air file and bring it. Now, I'd normally do them by hand. We'll do an air file on this with like 320 and 400, and honestly, it'll be smooth enough for the rest of this car. It's not that the car is severely wavy, but there's a lot of little minor waves. And honestly, maybe right from Dodge, it would have come that way in 69 because people remember things prettier than they actually were. But yeah, there's no reason not to make this nice. Well, we're doing this for now, and at some point down the road, maybe he restores it properly, or maybe it sits like this as long as he owns it. But the next guy, you know, we're saving the car can be driven, worked on, the bugs can be worked out of it. Down the line, if someone else owns it, there's nothing stopping them from doing rockers, skins, and rear quarters. Now, other than that, it's actually a pretty good car. Could use one proper floor pan if you're doing on one side, if you're doing a restoration. It could also use the member that goes, the cross member that holds your, what do you call it? The torsion bars, right? That's been welded. It's very solid. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you wanted this car to be really, really nice, that's something you'd have to replace. Our frame rails are really, really nice. They had like an anti-twist set up here for the axle, which was bolted to these. They're not in the way. See, we never cut them off. They're just welded onto the frame rails. But as you can see, the frame rails are nice. It has offset shackles, so you can put slightly fatter tires on. And if you look at this part, someone welded in that new. So I don't know. I'm not a Mopar guy, but maybe one of you guys out there can tell me. Are these rails and this up here replaced and moved inward for wider tires? If so, let me know. I find it funny they didn't cut all this out and mini tub it. However, look at that. So whatever tire will clear this, will clear that. You can see what they did here. So if anyone knows if that's stock or, because I did these cars before and I'm pretty sure these were straight, but I'm not 100% sure. I've done a lot of cars and it is hard to keep track. But I am kind of wondering if that was, you know, and maybe these guys, maybe they're offset a little different than the original ones. They do look newer than the rest of the car. So back when they turned this into a race car, a lot of the work was a little bit primitive. However, those looked like they were done properly. So I could be mistaken. Maybe that's all how it should be stock. But I don't know, should it have this big gap in here? Like, that's the bottom of the car, and then you've got those. Now from the top, you can't tell anything, so I don't know. If somebody out there knows, let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope the video is kind of fun. This car is basically about fun and not about any serious restoration work. This is a rip and tear, 1, 2, 3, smoke the Tigers car. It's going to be fun to boot around with. And that's basically what it is. Affordable muscle. If you can go out and find a body, go track down all the parts. There's no reason you couldn't do a 360 engine out of a wrecker, so on and so forth. You could build a car kind of like this. Anyway, thanks for watching. Cheers.